Hello, I'm Michael Bunch. I'm the plant pathologist at the North Dakota State University Carrington Research Extension Center. I'd like to give you a brief summary of what we have learned relative to the efficacy of the fungicide PROLINE relative to competitive standards for the management of white mold in dry beans. I would stress that this is a research summary. If you would like the results from individual research studies, you'd like to go into detail, I would suggest that you reference the corresponding PDF with detailed fungicide testing results. In this summary, I'm just going to give you average results across multiple studies. This testing was conducted with pinto beans in most studies, kidney beans in some studies. Row spacing was 14 inches in almost all cases. Seeding rate was 90,000 or 80,000 viable seeds an acre. Fungicides were applied with a handheld spray boom with a 15-gallon acre spray volume with fine or medium droplets in studies conducted from 2010 to 2021 and with droplet size calibrated relative to the canopy from 2022 to 2024. We conducted testing with two different fungicide applications, the first application at early bloom initial pod and the second application 7 to 14 days later, depending on the study. Testing was conducted with 5 or 6 experimental replicates in almost all studies. White mold is assessed at or near dry bean maturity by evaluating every plant individually for disease severity in minimum half of the plot. To ensure that variability in dry bean standability did not bias yields, plants were clipped to the base concurrent with the disease assessment, windrowed to dry, and manually lifted into the combine. This simulates knifing. We did not direct harvest because that would have introduced into our yield data variability in yield beyond what was caused by the disease management. Supplemental irrigation was applied as needed to facilitate white mold disease pressure. I would stress that testing was conducted with two sequential applications of the same fungicide with the goal of rigorously assessing comparative efficacy. We applied the same fungicide twice sequentially because when you do that, you compound any differences and it makes it easier to differentiate the relative efficacy of different application rates or different products. We do this to rigorously characterize fungicide efficacy, not to recommend that you apply the same fungicide twice. These results are meant to inform decision making, whether you apply the fungicide once or twice, whether you make a single fungicide application in the season, or you're looking for fungicides to utilize in a rotational strategy. Let's start off with Endura versus PROLINE. You can see statistically significant differences between these two fungicides, with Endura performing better. How about Topsin at 30 fluid ounces versus PROLINE? Here what you can see is that you have statistically significant differences in disease management and a very strong trend between these two fungicides in dry bean yield, with the Topsin performing much better than the PROLINE. How about Propulse at 10.3 fluid ounces versus PROLINE? Here you can see a statistically significant difference in disease management and a corresponding trend in yield. That's not statistically significant, but certainly corresponds to the disease ratings. How about Propulse at 8.6 fluid ounces versus PROLINE at 5.7 fluid ounces? Now you see that same trend in the yield data, but the difference is smaller, as you would expect with that lower application rate of Propulse. We still have statistically significant differences in disease management between these two products, with the Propulse performing better. How about PROLINE at 5.7 fluid ounces versus Omega at 13.6 fluid ounces? Here you see statistical separation on disease management and a strong but not statistically significant trend in the yield data. So, as a conclusion, what have we learned? PROLINE was less effective than all the other competitive standards that we tested. Topsin through 30 fluid ounces, Endura 8 ounces, Propulse at 8.6 or 10.3 fluid ounces, and Omega at 13.6 fluid ounces. Now, these results might come as a surprise to somebody who is accustomed to trying to manage white mold in canola. Now, PROLINE is very effective when applied directly to the blossom in terms of white mold management, but it is less effective when applied to a canopy in which the blossoms through which the white mold enters are buried within the canopy. In soybeans, for reference, We've also seen similar efficacy of PROLINE, where it just has not worked very well versus Topsin or Endura or Propulse when applied over the top of the canopy. But when we have applied the PROLINE with drop nozzles, such that the fungicide is sprayed basically directly at those senescing blossoms within the canopy, suddenly the PROLINE performs great. So this is a fungicide deposition problem. The reason why the fungicide is not performing well is because PROLINE, in order to perform well, needs to have very good deposition to those blossoms through which the white mold enters as the blossoms senesce. When we apply over the top of the dry bean canopy, it is typically very difficult to get satisfactory fungicide deposition to the blossoms, and the PROLINE requires that deposition. In closing, I'd like to thank my staff. Aaron Faust, Ryan Collis, Jesse Hafner, Gabby Henson. These are my current staff, and Thomas Miorini, Billy Kraft, and Michael Schaefer, my former staff, who all contributed very long hours and very hard work towards the execution of these studies. The staff in Langdon who contributed towards this research include Scott Halley, the retired plant pathologist. He conducted the work before he retired, and Amanda Ahrens, the research specialist who worked with him at that time and is still a research specialist up in Langdon working on crop disease management. I'd also like to give my very sincere thanks to North Harvest Bean Growers Association, the North Dakota Crop Protection Product Harmonization and Registration Board administered by the North Dakota Department of Agriculture, and the private companies who funded this research. And I'd also like to thank Bollingberg Seeds Company, Green Valley Bean Company, and Kelly Bean Company in Hatton for donating dry bean seed for use in our white mold management research studies over the years. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope these research results are informative as you seek to improve your operations.